KFWB News Talk 980. This is Dr. Chambers on call, keeping you healthy without the dreaded copay. Professor Stephen Hawking is a well-known scientist. There's a new documentary out on him called Hawking. His star power exudes in this documentary. Absolutely exudes out there. Now, if you're not familiar with Professor Hawking, he is one of the greatest minds in science and physics in the last 100 years. He's the guy who's developed the theories of the Big Bang Theory. He wrote A Brief History of Time. He's got all kinds of stuff. The tragedy, if there is one for Professor Hawking, is that he has motor neuron disease, what we call ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or Lou Gehrig's disease, you may know it as. That's when all the muscles in your body just decay. They don't work. Professor Hawking at this point is in a wheelchair, and he communicates by blinking, and there's one muscle in his cheek that the computer hooks up to, and it stimulates the voice thing on it, so he speaks in a computer type voice. Even when he does that, you still get what he's talking about. Now, at the premiere of this documentary, he says, "We don't let animals suffer, so why would we let humans suffer?" And he's talking about euthanasia. He's talking about letting people end their own life on their own terms. And I agree with him. After all the years I've been in medicine, after all the years I've thought about this, after all the deaths I've seen, and there have been quite a few, obviously, that's what medicine is about. It's about helping people, and inevitably the end comes. I've also seen it in my personal life. So it's been a long journey for me, and I wanted to share some of my thoughts with you, because now in the United States, there are 4 states that have legalized euthanasia: Oregon, Vermont, Washington, and Montana. So this is something that we all have to get comfortable with. This is something that we all have to begin to understand. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. But I also want to remind you that I'm live in the studio, so if you want to call in and chat about something about your health or your family's health, 888-539-2980. That's 888-539-2980. So Professor Hawking feels that those who have a terminal illness are in great pain should have the right to choose to end their own life, and those that help them should be free from prosecution. Professor Hawking lives in the United Kingdom, where it is illegal to help somebody commit suicide, and he wants this law changed. But he wants it changed with safeguards. He wants it changed so that it should be the choice of the person themselves without pressure. Now, one of the reasons over the years that I have been incredibly reluctant about euthanasia is very simple. I never thought we could introduce safeguards that would be safe enough to allow us to do this. The Europeans, much more aggressive about this than we are. Much more aggressive. In Holland and Belgium, euthanasia is much more accepted. And some of the cases that they do make me very uncomfortable. Sometimes it's in awfully young people who have had botched operations, like a recent transgender operation, or people born with congenital diseases who just get tired of it. Now, what you have to understand, if you've been a physician as long as I am, no matter what disease you have, whether you have Crohn's disease or asthma, it waxes and wanes. Sometimes it wears you down. Sometimes you feel you want to give up. And that is not what we're talking about this morning. And those will be very, very bad cases. And those are not cases that you would want to have euthanasia for in any shape or make. Also, I think one of the reasons that this is coming forward is because we in medicine have not done a good job. We in medicine have allowed people to have miserable, awful, painful deaths. Or people have gasped and wheezed and been short of breath for days, weeks, months before they died. As a result of that, a lot of anger arose, and families said, look what you're doing. Why are you doing all this? And that's what I want to talk about a little bit this morning, and that's what I kind of want to drive through. But let's go back to Professor Hawking's story and just follow it through, because he has a very interesting take on it. He was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, this motor neuron disease, at the age of 21. He was a hotshot, brilliant guy in one of the equivalent of Ivy League colleges in England. He was having a little dilettante's life, was doing great, and he developed this syndrome. Now, what happens slowly but surely is the muscles start to fade, and each individual muscle contracts on its own. It's what we call a fasciculation. So if you look at someone's arms or their chest or their tongue, you see like little worms crawling along, and it's the muscles individually contracting. It's a very visual thing when you first see it. It's kind of striking. And if you want to see what it looks like, you can go to a mirror, stick your tongue out, and wait for 30, 40 seconds, and that you'll have fasciculations. And that's normal. Don't panic. That is normal. But you'll see what I mean if you do that. Maybe even a little bit longer than 30, 40 seconds. So the good professor was lucky in the sense that he was a theoretical physicist, and his job is about thinking, about imagining. In fact, he thinks his handicap has helped him in his chosen career because he doesn't have to go to boring committee meetings. And he can spend his whole day in his mind thinking about the universe, its origins, and all of those other things that, to be quite frank, I can't understand. He wrote a very popular book called A Brief History of Time, which I bought, tried to read, and gave up. A bit like Ulysses, just too vast, too complicated, couldn't get it. So, but there was an event in 1985 in Professor Hawking's life that's very striking. And what happened was he was visiting mainland Europe from the UK. He got really sick, got a really nasty pneumonia, and wasn't getting better. And the doctor said to his first wife, Jane, what do you want to do? Do you want to withdraw the ventilator? Do you want to withdraw life support? Do you want to stop treatment? And she said, no, I do not want to do that. I want to be aggressive. I want to do everything. And there was a little frank exchange of views, I think, and she took her husband back over to the UK. He was aggressively treated, and he's lived. And since then, he's won lots of awards. In fact, he's even divorced that first wife, got a second wife, divorced her, and now he's on his own again. So he's had a very eventful social life since then. And one of the things that he said in his speech when he came out and said, we don't let animals suffer, why humans? He wanted safeguards because he wants to make sure that if euthanasia is going to be performed, that the person involved had to give consent when they could. Because back in 85, he would not have consented to being not treated. He would not have consented to not going on the ventilator. He would not have done that. So there weren't any safeguards for him. And he's aware of this. Now, this reminds me of a story in my own life. When I was a young man, I was in my early 20s in Dublin, I was an intern. And this patient kept bouncing in and out, and he had motor neuron disease, which I had read about, but didn't really understand. So when he came in, I was looking him up, doing this, doing that. And he bounced in and out about 5 times when I was an intern. And one of the last times he came in, he was pretty sick. And we were going to have to be really aggressive to keep him going. And my vote was no. I didn't think we were going to do him any favors. I didn't think. And the older neurologist who was in charge, the staff guy, who's about my age now, he was probably in his late 40s, early 50s. He said, oh, no, we're going to treat him. He's got a long ways to go. And I just thought that was wrong. I just thought, what are we doing? Decades later, I understand what the neurologist was doing. He was right. I was wrong. I was young. I was callow. Didn't quite get it. Didn't quite understand what it was all about. That particular gentleman went on and lived just a little bit longer. I think he got about another 6 to 9 months out of it. And that was okay. Because there's always a line about where do you go, where do you not go? And one of the things that I feel is really important is this, that we should control our health. We should decide whether we're going to get treated or not get treated. When you go to see a physician, she makes suggestions. You don't have to follow them. You can just say, hey, I don't want to do that. I don't want surgery. I don't want to take that medicine. That's your choice. But when it comes to our death, it's equally our choice. It's equally our decision on what should happen and what shouldn't happen. And that brings me back to the whole concept of hospice, which is starting to catch on in America, but is much more advanced in Europe. So when I come back from break, let's talk a little bit about hospice, take some of your calls, and just chat in general. And I promise you, we'll move on to lighter topics as well. 888-539-2